Hello, and welcome to the Linux Spotlight. This show is dedicated to showing off the best thing about Linux, our community. This community is made up of developers, distro maintainers, YouTubers, and everyday users. Each one plays a vital role in our community, and the goal is to have a discussion with each individual about their journey into Linux and beyond. So join me now as we turn the spotlight on. Hello, I'm your host Rocco, and with me today is my friend Schyken, Alan Diggs.
Hello, I am sometimes Schyken, but I'm sure I have 3,000 names you could call me.
Yes, that's right. Well, okay, so you have been a Biddle community member for a very long time.
Yeah, scary.
To the point where I'm pretty sure, like last week I talked to Colin and I know he was. I am 99% sure you were there on that first live stream that I did way back when. So that's a pretty long time. You also have your own YouTube channel and you are an elementary OS fanboy.
That I am. That I certainly am.
But before all of that stuff, who is Alan?
Well, I like to consider myself an enthusiastic computer enthusiast, but I'm also a purveyor of the chicken arts. And I really like cooking. I really like music, and I love my very small but nice family. So, yeah.
Awesome. Let me. I would be like killed if I didn't ask this question. So, like, how did this whole name, because everybody knows you by Schyken. I mean, everybody knows you by that. So how did you come up with, or how did that come all about?
Oh, boy, I really wish it was super exciting, but I was in 7th grade, and I needed a name, and I couldn't figure out what I was going to use for my grand username, because these are the important things you think about in 7th grade.
Mm-hmm.
Because I never wanted to change it ever, and I didn't want anyone else to have it because I'm greedy. So I had a chicken skin in Minecraft, the best game ever.
Right.
And I was like, well, chicken's taken everywhere. So how can I make chicken better? And clearly the only solution is adding a whole bunch of letters in between the front of it. And I first it was just Schyken, and that was taken on a few sites. And so I was like, all right, well, let's make it a little more complicated and harder to pronounce, because why not? And I tried that, and Schyken wasn't taken. So I checked it across, I'd say 30 different sites before I actually settled on it. Because I wanted to make absolutely sure I wasn't going to have to change it later. And I went with it, and it took a while to catch on. It was just a Minecraft username at first. And then as soon as I use it as my Skype handle, it got like inescapable. I was Schyken all the way.
Well, we laugh about this, and you talk about thinking about this in 7th grade, but usernames are way more important than people give credit for. It's like, think about it from a standpoint of starting a YouTube channel. There's so many names out there that are taken, or, people try to put Linux in it somewhere, or they try to make a specific username like Schyken to stand out. And you're right. You don't want to change it. You don't want to have to share it with somebody. And yeah, pretty awesome, man.
It's a hard choice to make.
It is. Absolutely is. So, do you have any other hobbies besides Linux, man?
I walk way too much. I know you're supposed to get exercise and it's healthy, but I'm like, it's hours out of the day. I just love walking, man.
But you're like in Arizona, and you have like ridiculous heat out there.
It's insanely hot, but the one.
So what are you doing walking, dude?
I put in my headphones, and even though I tell myself I've got so many podcasts to listen to, I play some random music and I just walk.
Nice.
Yeah.
Awesome. So what do you do for a day job?
Well, I cook chicken at the moment, and I feel like it's perfect for me, really, because
That is beautiful.
that was my main inspiration. I was thinking, I love chicken. I love eating chicken. Why not make chicken? I could really sell this whole chicken thing if I just went all in. So here I am.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's going well.
Well, you, like we talked about, you have a YouTube channel and you have all kinds of different content on there. You have Minecraft videos. You have videos about distros. You have videos about snaps and Flatpacks. What is your favorite thing to put a video out on?
It's really strange because I first started that channel sharing a lot of the things that I was doing with Linux, and almost every video that I made was involving Linux. And that slowly evolved into me also playing video games primarily on Linux. I believe there's only one video that wasn't on Linux, and I won't even tell you which one it was because I don't remember. But I slowly grew into playing more games because it was content that I really enjoyed making, because it was something I enjoyed doing, and I felt like I could share that with other people. And it was probably around August of this year that I decided that I really, really wanted to go for it. And, I was just trying to figure out how. And so I absolutely love making Linux content. But from here on out, I think I want to make absolutely sure that when I do put out Linux content, it's very well thought out and very well sort of worded and put together. So that way, when people are watching it, it's a lot easier for them to take in, because I know how frustrating it can be watching a video and just kind of wondering, where's the point or where are you going with this? And, so I want to make sure that if I make something more technical, it's a lot more understandable to normal people. So
Right. Well, your latest videos include Super Mario Brothers.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not just you playing Super Mario Brothers, it's your commentary during playing Super Mario Brothers that makes it awesome. So people, you should go check that out, just saying. So before we get into Linux specifically, where did you begin in your computers? What was the first computer you used?
I'd have to say it was my mom's DVR. So I had a habit of playing, like just fiddling with things when I was a little kid. And I guess the first computer-related task for me was trying to find like a way to get through the password lock on the DVR so I could watch cartoons that weren't available. Turns out those cost money, but that's a story for another time.
Right.
And from there, in school, I guess, when I was in elementary school, I remember loading up games on floppy disks on like Windows 2000 computers, which makes me feel old, but I hear people tell stories of computers that don't even speak the same language, which blows my mind. Yeah, I guess it really started when I was in about primary school, playing with school computers, trying to get through, loading games that they didn't want us playing on there. And I have a bad habit of just not doing what I'm told. It's
weird. Somehow we'll get into more of that later. So you're in elementary school or whatever, you're looking at these computers and you're using them. Where do you hear the word Linux from for the first time?
Oh, it was actually a long time later in the future. I hadn't actually heard of Linux for some reason until I was, I'd say, high school aged, maybe my second year, late 2015, early 2016. And I first heard of it when I was looking for an alternative OS for my laptop, because it didn't quite make sense to me that hardware like that would exist and the software on it just didn't actually work well with it. Yeah, it just didn't click with me. So I figured there must be another way.
Nice. So how does that translate into you trying Linux? Like, what computer are you putting this on? What did you first try?
I had an HP 2000 notebook, and some of them were fairly decent, and others were a little difficult. And I had one of the particularly difficult ones. Not that it was bad, but it was very picky in the way that it ran, and it didn't have a lot of headroom. I think there was maybe 4 gigs of RAM, which Windows absolutely destroyed. And I first loaded Ubuntu on it because it was the first result online for a lightweight operating system when I Googled it. So I installed Ubuntu from there, and I absolutely hate it. I was like, this works, but it just looks garbage. No offense, but I had no idea, what Linux was. I had no
Right.
idea how XFCE was supposed to work or anything like that. So coming from Windows, I was like, this is madness. Why would I use this? You know, um, of course, being me, even though I should have had a backup plan, I did all of these distro hops, first exploring things like absolutely off the deep end. I didn't have a backup. I didn't, I just wiped the drive right away. I was like, how bad can it be? Needless to say, I distro hopped for 6 hours.
Oh my
And
gosh.
eventually I found, I think it was Linux Mint 17.2 or 17.3. And it was the XFCE version, ironically. I guess it was familiar the way that they laid it out. And I figured, oh, this will be good for me. So I ran with Linux Mint XFCE, and eventually I switched over to Cinnamon for, I'd say, a solid 10 months. And that was my
Wow.
primary distro on my main laptop. I didn't even bother looking back from Windows.
So, well, let's go with the Linux Mint, not the first one you tried, because when you first try Linux and you ask somebody what are the pros and cons of that, their first experience is not going to always be a good one. So let's go with the Linux Mint XFCE. What are some of the pros and cons when you finally settle on that one with your first experiences with it?
I guess one of the pros was that despite it looking weird and feeling kind of alien at first, it didn't function fundamentally any different than I would expect a computer to do. I clicked on things with the mouse and they opened up. It was something that I wasn't expecting Linux to be. After I had looked a little more into Linux and I had asked my friends about Linux to see what they thought about it, no one seemed to have a positive opinion about it. But when I used it, I didn't see very much to be negative about, although I can find reasons to complain anywhere. I was most happy about the fact that it was actually a reasonable choice for an operating system. It did exactly what it should have done. I opened up my web browser like I'd assume any normal person would. I went to any number of websites and they all worked. So the way I saw it was, this is no different than Windows or Mac in terms of how you're able to use a computer. You have every availability open to you.
Yep. So do you still use Windows or Mac in any way?
I boot up Windows every now and then because I want to see what's new. I want to kind of keep up with what's going on. And sometimes I hear about things that Windows does differently, or I hear about things that they've changed. And I really want to see it because I've used Windows for most of my life since I was a little kid. And I think it's good to kind of keep up with things, especially if you're on another platform, to see the kind of growth that both of them have and what their similarities and differences are. However, I can't say Windows is actually installed on any of the machines in this house at the moment. And anytime they are, it's for insanely short amounts of time.
It's just to check things out and
Yeah.
continue on. That's pretty awesome, dude. People will be excited to hear that.
It's good stuff.
Now, I mean, do you dabble in Macs?
I do actually. I'm a filthy Mac user. I rather like MacBooks. However, I have some criticisms, but I like the overall experience that they try to provide, and I like that they pay so much attention to how their services connect with one another. And I certainly realize why in the Linux world that's so taboo, I guess. But I think it's something that we can learn from, and we can build similar types of environments that are less closed. And I feel like it's a good thing to admire, even if from a distance, because that's, in my opinion, an example of user experience done right.
Yep. Well, you've been known to, make purchases before and even maybe sometimes during live streams.
I know where this is going.
So one time you were on Biddle, and I believe it was a Samsung Galaxy. Was it that you ordered right on live?
Yeah, it was the S9 Plus, and it was the 250 gig edition that they didn't even offer at like stores near me. You could only get it through Samsung. And I was like, that's obviously got to be the one if no one else has it.
Right. I thought that was comical. I mean, and everybody else loved it because we were basically just talking about it. We brought it up and all of a sudden, oh yeah, by the way, I purchased that just now.
I just dropped it on you guys. I was like, yeah, I'm just going to do it.
Right. But, I heard from a friend that you may have walked into Best Buy and tried installing elementary OS on their computers. Can you tell us about that?
So there's these rumors going around, these alleged actions of mine. I spend a lot of time at Best Buy, I'll give you that. And maybe, just maybe, I have a live USB or two that I sometimes plug in, hypothetically.
Right.
And I love it because I can go in there and essentially see how anything works on any of the wacky new hardware that's out without ever having to buy it. And I think that's a great deal. That's a Best Buy.
I love it.
I certainly think that I think a few of the people there were a little annoyed, but they grew to like me over time because they had no choice. I bought their stuff, and that's all there was to it.
Right.
So I went ahead and I actually got permission to install Linux on some of these machines by one of the managers.
You actually got permission to do it?
Yeah, I did.
Yes, I love it.
A little wacky because they're not supposed to do that technically, but they have like ITs to fix things when I break them. So it's not a huge issue.
You sure this was the manager and not some customer walking around?
Someone in a blue shirt. I'm sure it was fine. But I guess my most exciting accomplishment was installing it on the installing Elementary on the Microsoft Surface Studio, which was gorgeous. Oh my goodness, it was an amazing experience.
That right there is priceless. Just saying. So everybody has a different story based on where they're at as far as the people around them. Some people will say that like Biddle itself will be the only place that they can talk to someone about Linux. What is it like in your general area? Are you able to talk to people around you about Linux and have them not look at you like you're crazy?
I guess in a few instances I've been able to, and a lot of it has, I guess, kind of just been lack of knowledge. So I've had luck with a few of my friends who are more technically inclined, talking to them about Linux, talking to them about, what I essentially do. Even my partner, I talk about that stuff, and it's just like, oh, wow, yeah, bunch of technical stuff. Okay. Like, yeah, that's what I do. It doesn't make any sense to anyone. But I've noticed that when I don't actually, I guess, talk about it in this sort of subcategory of Linux and the whole sort of alternate environment type of thing, when I just give someone a laptop running elementary OS or something, other distros are available.
Right, of course, yes.
It's interesting because that kind of technical confusion or mystification doesn't exist when I show it to them that way. when I show them the actual product, when I show them the platform and not the sort of underground kind of buildings of it, they actually take to it just fine and they seem to like it. So I feel like it's probably the approach.
I think if you handed somebody a laptop with Elementary or one of the other distros that we have available to us, if you handed somebody a laptop with that on it without making them install it or download an ISO or anything like that, I think the reaction would be a ton better, especially with distros like Elementary. And, you know, I've been recently trying Zorin OS, and that's come a long way. And you could actually hand these to people, and I'm almost positive they would just take to it without even knowing what it is.
It's rather nice, actually, and I certainly agree with you. I've done that a few times with Elementary OS, and I think one time with Ubuntu, and that was when it was with Unity. So I have no idea if they upgraded it or not. It's been a long time, but I've been able to just give it to someone, and they just take off with it, and I love that.
Well, where in your mind does the Linux desktop stand? Is it something that is going to be around for a while? Or, you know, a lot of people think we're all going to be using tablets or mobile devices soon.
Well, as much as I'm kind of in like a middle ground here, because I've seen a lot more tablet devices come through. Tablets are getting more powerful, but I still see a massive market for laptops. And I feel like despite the fact that tablets can be super powerful, run all the same hardware, and even mobile hardware at the same time, I feel like there's enough demand and there's enough understanding of what a laptop is supposed to be that it's not going to necessarily replace that. And I don't think we're going to see the kind of desktop laptop paradigm move away until after we've already got new ways of experiencing computing, such as VR being a more normal thing, or needing essentially less of an attachment to, I guess, physical devices in your hand.
Yep. So anybody that knows you knows that you love Elementary OS, but I assume that this is, you know, your daily driver, but I hear you've been dabbling in Debian lately and liking it. So tell us about it.
The good old Debbie dabbler. I did not like Debian when I first tried it back in Debian 9. And ever since then, I've kind of written it off. You know, I've tried it every now and then. It's just been hard to wrap my head around. You know, the whole adding my user to the sudoers thing, the whole, I don't know, the way repositories were handled, like getting non-free repos installed was a little weird. And then Debian 10 came along, and I was skeptical, but I was like, what if I just did this? And so I did. And what I came to find was that I don't know what changed between Debian 9 and Debian 10. The answer is probably nothing. I'm probably the one who changed.
Maybe.
I installed it, and despite booting to a black screen with a blinking cursor, I hopped into Nano, installed or added the contrib, the non-free repos, added the NVIDIA drivers, and I just went with it. Like, it was such a clean experience, and I feel like it solved a lot of the frustrations that I had with Ubuntu, and that was very awkward dependency management. I had one very big issue, but once that was solved, everything else was perfect. I had no issues with the right things getting pulled in when they needed to be, the right things getting taken out when they needed to be. And overall, it just felt less cluttered. And it wasn't because there was less installed by default, because I counted. There are more games than actual applications on Debian by default. However, in terms of and it's not the defaulted Weta theme either, I swear.
Right.
It's a much cleaner experience. And a lot of that, I think, comes from not having the additional things on top, not having that sort of Ubuntu branding and Ubuntu experience. It was a very raw feeling, and I don't tend to gravitate towards those kinds of distros, but I feel like Debian is the only one I'd probably feel comfortable with if I had to go that route.
Well, speaking of distros, you are a king of distro hopping. You have tried billions. At least that's what I have calculated through Telegram chats and whatnot. So tell us about some of your distro hopping experiences.
Yeah, well, thankfully, most of them have been pretty good. I've never, I don't think, run into issues with destroying a whole array of drives or writing over the wrong partition.
I can do that.
Did that. Yeah,
I can do that very well.
There are some professionals out there with formatting large arrays of drives. That's pretty nice.
Yep. Steve from the Biddle group, he can. Me and him are just going to go into work together, destroying distros. But give me another one. If Elementary and Debian were not a thing anymore, what do you think you would be running from all of your hopping?
Well, okay, just kind of question that real quick. If Debian disappeared, does that mean Debian-based distros would also disappear?
No.
No? Okay,
no,
cool.
not necessarily.
I'd go with popOS in a heartbeat.
Okay, yes.
I was like, please make it easy for me.
When's the last time you tried popOS?
It's installed right now.
Oh my gosh. And how is it?
You wouldn't stop talking about it, man.
I know. It's awesome, dude. I love it.
It really is, honestly.
So what's your overall feel of popOS?
I love what they've done with from the installer being really cute, by the way. That little robot is adorable. From the installer just being super simple, but not lacking in features, to being insanely fast and boot up times being insanely fast, having encryption options by default. When I first boot into it, the experience is just clean. I set up my account. I sign into my Google or whatever insert terrible cloud provider here. And I go with it. I don't have a bunch of things to uninstall. I do exactly what I expect, and they have this application called Eddy installed by default. So I don't need to worry about if I want to install a deb, I have to install it via the terminal, or I have to drag it into the software center, I guess, which you can do now, which is, I don't know if that works with GNOME software or not, but I like that it's set up for pretty much anyone to use. It's a clean slate, but not empty, which is really, really nice.
Yep, I have to agree, and I will add a few more of the theming is awesome.
Yes.
The gaming performance will surprise anybody because you hear of GNOME and you hear of you what normally you receive is GNOME slow, GNOME is this, GNOME is that. GNOME on popOS is not slow, and the gaming performance is absolutely awesome on it.
You're absolutely right about that. For some reason lately, it's been a little consistent. I don't know if it's an update in OBS or if it's an update in something else in the whole stack. I've noticed very high performance usages in things like OBS for recording the same stuff that I was recording just a couple months ago. I don't know what changed. I don't know how it changed or why, but I've noticed that it's also somewhat tied to game performance and somewhat tied to when I'm recording. Obviously, both of those things will go down in performance. The changes were immediately reverted when I started using popOS, which blew my mind because I had this issue in Ubuntu. I had this issue in Debian. I haven't actually tried it in Elementary OS, but I used popOS, and I can record with very low CPU usage. My frame rates are still super high in the game. I mean, who doesn't love running Minecraft at a buttery 2000 FPS?
Well, you've been known to make ridiculous sized videos and render them out. Tell us about some of these ridiculous projects that you have tried to render?
Well, I have a habit of trying to, I guess, not find the absolute limit, but I want to find
The absolute limit.
the absolute limit. Yeah. There's got to be a better word for that. That doesn't make me seem crazy.
That's not crazy. That's just pushing the limits.
Yeah. I'll go with that. I'll fly with that. I have a tendency to record in very, very high presets, if not creating my own presets, and I want them named after me. I like doing this because it allows me a lot of flexibility in terms of managing color spaces, in terms of managing sharpness in certain areas of the picture that otherwise would be a little grainy due to like encoding settings. A lot of it basically comes down to me being, it's like preparing for the apocalypse. If you're preparing for the apocalypse, you're probably already going overboard. So why not take it all the way? And that's essentially what I do, and I record. If there's a number that I see, I want to just push it one more over. And if I can get away with it, I absolutely will.
Nice. Well, a lot of the times I will ask somebody what their daily workflow is. Do you have a daily workflow or a set of software that you use?
Yeah, and I have two very specific ones that depend on whether I'm using elementary OS or whether I'm using GNOME on pretty much any distribution. I was going to say distribution environment, but that's a little weird. I typically have workspaces set up, and the first one's always a browser and maybe some other quick tasks that I'm working on right at the minute. Second workspace is always two messaging clients split into the top left and bottom right corner. And the reason for this is not only to separate them, but I can see them in overview. And it also means if I want to like have a video up in like a picture-in-picture window, I can do that. Third workspace, also messaging clients. Fourth workspace is always primary or secondary task at hand. So if I'm writing something like an article, I do it that way. Or if I'm running like a Minecraft server, I've got my files in there. I've got the server window up. I've got Minecraft in the next workspace after that. So everything I do is essentially task oriented. And the first three workspaces are almost always the same. And the ones after that tend to vary, but they all contain things relevant to whatever task that I'm doing, which not only helps keep me organized, it just makes me quicker at what I'm doing because I know, okay, slide up to this workspace, slide down to that workspace, and let it rip.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well, I never got into workspaces. I have tried, and I know that they would help me organize the way I use my system, but I just feel like I lose contact with what's not on the screen.
You do have one benefit running popOS, and that's that they do have workspace hotkeys set up much better than any other GNOME distro I've seen. I think switching between workspaces is just like super up and down. So you can just slide up and slide down whenever you want. But I could definitely see not getting into workspaces because even though Windows has it now, pretty sure no one uses it.
Pretty sure.
It's just all on one screen because you can access everything there anyway. You've got Alt-Tab, you've got your taskbar. So, like, what's the deal?
Well,
and with that activities overview,
I know that it's there. That's the thing, and I want to at some point try to get used to it and try to use it. But like I said, I have this fear that, not fear, but I have this thing that if I don't see it on the screen, I'm going to like kind of forget about it. Although the flip side to that is me trying to put every window that I have in some kind of space on my screens. So
this just in, Rocco neglects his Telegram window.
Because it's on the other workspace.
He's frustrated.
Oh my gosh. All right. So there are, you have KDE, you have XFCE can be very beautiful. KDE is one of the best looking, modern looking desktop environments out there. What made you fall in love with Elementary?
Well, you can't put a price on love, right? And I feel like if there was a price, I couldn't count to it. A lot of it came down to, despite it being very pretty and aesthetics being very important to me, just because impressions are everything, I think. I also came to like that none of the decisions that they made were made for the sake of it being pretty. Like it's not just like everything on there is candy. And a lot of this may be seen in the sort of the appearance of it being stripped down, or it being featureless, or whatever you want to call it.
Lockdown is usually the word you hear.
And the way I see it is not necessarily that it's locked down, but that the things that are there are done very carefully after a lot of consideration and a lot of testing, and they're done with a purpose. So the lack of a minimize button, that's not because they hate you and they want you, to just go in the corner and never minimize your windows again. It's because they have a system in place for window management that means you won't have to minimize your windows. Like, the way workspace management is done, the way Alt-Tab is handled, the way all of this other stuff is handled, you shouldn't have to essentially hide a window and then be thinking about it while you're trying to do other things and maybe eventually remember it later after you've already opened up another window. You should be able to see everything that you're doing at a glance without having to, I guess, manually manage all of that stuff. And I think they've done a great job with that. So for me, a lot of it comes down to it manages to be incredibly purely functional while being very pretty, which I feel like people think you have to compromise on, and I just don't believe that.
But I think that's very important what you said. And that is, you have bought into the Elementary system as far as how they operate their desktop environment. It's different from everywhere else.
Very.
Okay. And there are differences with it, but I think it's important, and I always say when I try a distro, I will try it the way the developer intended it. Maybe later I'll tweak it around and put it the way I want to, but I want to try it initially because you learn new ways of doing things, and maybe sometimes even better ways. And that's important for people to look at, to have an open mind when they go and try a distro like Elementary. And instead of trying to make Elementary like the distro you just came from, use it for what it is and understand what they're trying to do. And I think a lot of people would be more open to it then.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I see the same thing with just about every distro. It's always, I want it to do this, that, or that, like this does, like Project X or Y does. And the first thought that always comes to my mind is like, well, why not use the project that you want it to be like? I mean, it essentially solves all your problems.
Right.
Well,
look, we have come a long way in as far as programs and games and everything in Linux. Is there any programs out there that you would like to see come to Linux?
Off the top of my head, I mean, I'm a big fan of a program called paint.net. It's like a medium simple. It's like the halfway point between like GIMP and MS Paint. It's got like layer editing, but it doesn't have crazy transparency effects. But I think there's already a clone of that called Pinta. So gaming-wise, I think we've pretty much got it covered. I mean, Proton at the very least does a really good job at assisting with things that aren't native to Linux. And in terms of applications, I mean, we've got DaVinci Resolve, even though it's not really nice to get set up. Just flashbacks here.
Yeah, I take it you've had issues with getting that set up.
Honestly, I guess my biggest complaint is that you have no idea what's going on when it's not working. It's just kind of confusion. And then I essentially, the way I solve my problems with DaVinci Resolve is to run all of the troubleshooting steps and then see if something worked. So, I mean, I'll install it, and if it doesn't open, I install like all the drivers, all the like the NVIDIA CUDA stuff, and then I symlink all the things, and then I run some arcane like reinstall program, and then boom, it works. Don't know which one of those fixed it, but I know one of them did.
Well, like you said, we've come a long way in games. And that is a big part of people trying Linux. At least I feel it is. There are a lot of people out there. If the games was no longer an issue, Linux adoption would be way higher, in my opinion.
I agree.
So I will always say the community is the best reason for running Linux. Some people think it's the flexibility, the openness. What is your feeling on running Linux, and why do you want to run Linux?
So I've always been, I guess, the kind of weird one in that I've never taken a philosophical stance or an ideological stance. Wow, that is a word. I've never kind of wanted my focus to be about freedom or privacy of any sort. It was about enjoying my computer in ways that I didn't get to before. It was about finding new ways to do things. And when I use Linux, when I use a system like Elementary or Ubuntu or Zorin, I'm essentially looking at different platforms that Linux facilitates and Linux allows me to essentially use. And to me, I feel like that's what really draws me in. It is just everything is, despite being drawn to this core Linux component, every project can have its own identity and still work with other projects. And performance-wise, Linux absolutely nails it. I mean, the scalability of Linux is wonderful. So whether you've got like a little 2-core laptop with no hyperthreading, or you've got a 16-core AMD monster, like, you're gonna be fine. It knows how to scale up to those things. It knows how to handle that. Whereas Windows, it can. Like, it's not like they're just buffoons running around, with their only 4-core processors. They have hardware support. It's just, in my experience, much less finessed than the way Linux handles it. It's a very hit or miss situation.
Yep. So how have you found the community in your experience? Obviously, there's toxic parts of the community. Some are friendly. How have you seen the overall experience?
Really good, actually. A part of me wants to be all negative and be like, yeah, it's real terrible, everybody's bad, but no, I actually really like the community, and it's pretty awesome because you see people from everywhere in the world, and even people in the same parts of the world have wildly different experiences. And there's this sense of willingness to help or to share and to just kind of figure things out that I really find refreshing, and I don't see often enough on the internet in general. And it's really nice to have. It's really nice to see what people are working on, and it's nice to see how passionate they are about it all.
Yep. There's nothing that you can replace passion with. If you are passionate about something, regardless of what it is, that's the most important thing, because you're going to relate to people just by how you're presenting it, rather than trying to sell it to somebody.
Yeah.
So, what do you think that the Linux community as a whole can do to make it better?
I feel like one of the things that we can definitely do is, I guess, hold back on spreading misinformation, on sort of splitting hairs on things that we haven't proven or really shouldn't be making such a big deal out of. I feel like we paint a lot of projects in a negative light before they're given a fair shake and a fair chance to defend themselves, or to, I guess, have the facts revealed. I just barely looked into this evil gnome thing, and I assumed it was ridiculous because the name is ridiculous. So I didn't look into any of it. And then now that the dust is kind of settling and everybody's joking about it now, I'm looking at it and I'm thinking, how did this escalate that far? How did we allow that to happen? And I feel like a lot of it comes down to not only responsibility within the people who are publishing things and writing articles about things that, we should hold them to a level of responsibility to check their facts, to have good sources on good terms. And I don't see a lot of that going on right now, and it's dangerous. But I feel like as a community, we have a responsibility to check that ourselves as well, and not go ahead and share that if we can't verify it.
Right. Well, to further your point, if you had looked up or even opened your browser to any of the major sites during that time, all you seen was articles or videos on Evil Gnome, and half of them or more were the sky is falling type articles about this. And I totally agree that we need to have a higher level of reporting these things rather than just get, I want to be the first guy out there with the first article or the first video on this so it gets the most clicks. So
yeah, you're absolutely right.
So do you do any developing, maintaining of packages for anywhere?
Not at the moment. I have an interest in doing something like that at some point. I have struggled a lot in my life with sort of long-term, I guess, contributions to certain projects, or sort of sticking with something and being able to be motivated throughout it all. A lot of it just comes down to motivation, and a lot of it comes from not really knowing or believing that I can really contribute enough for it to be worth anyone else's time or my own. I make small contributions here and there to different projects. Like, it's like nearly insignificant. Sometimes I'll try and translate things, or I'll like fix the wording in a document somewhere, or I'll proofread something in somebody's script on GitHub. But in terms of maintaining any packages, I don't do any of that publicly currently. All of my development really has mostly been with like Minecraft mod packs, server plugins. I've written a few actual mods that are supposed to join different mods together in this sort of like cross compatibility layer. In regards to the greater open source community, unfortunately, I haven't really been able to do much other than throw my money at things that I like. So
yes, but don't underestimate the power of helping out even in little ways, like you mentioned translations or proofreading a document or whatever. That stuff is invaluable to some of the communities, because depending on which community you're doing it for, that's exactly what they're looking for. That's exactly what they need. So I wouldn't underestimate that. So you have distro hopped a ton. You have helped out a little bit here and there with software. You know that there are issues and there are problems that come with running Linux.
Yeah.
Do you have an example of like something that you broke and then fixed?
Oh boy, do I ever.
I mean, I have a ton of them, but
oh, where do I begin? Let's see. I believe at one point I had started to do an install of something, or maybe it was a backup. I had done some kind of write operation on something, and I had essentially destroyed the entire like RAID array inside my computer.
Oh my.
So it's about 4 terabytes worth of data that just kind of like was just completely inaccessible by that point, because obviously I'm running in RAID 0.
Right.
As you do. And I was, oh goodness. I had to somehow scramble to get all that stuff back because there was some stuff that my mother was working on that was hosted on those drives.
Oops.
Yeah, this is what happens when I'm in charge of the computers.
But you did get the information back, right?
Yes, this was at like 4 a.m, and I was like, "Oh dear, looks like I'm not going to sleep tonight," which happens a lot.
I was gonna say that happens like all the time, dude.
Now you know what I'm doing.
You are like active on the Telegram group at any given point in the day. It doesn't matter what time of day you're there doing something.
Yeah, it's a problem. It's a real problem. I thankfully have a system that sort of offloads like snapshots and copies of everything onto another device in the house, as well as one outside of the house. So while it takes a lot of time to rebuild, I was thankfully able to get that back and running by like 7:30 in the morning.
Wow.
In which case my mom was awake, so I wasn't going back to sleep.
Well, hey, at least you got it back and working.
Yeah, my main priority has always been, because obviously this whole Linux jump, my mom didn't do it for us. You know, the whole house is running Linux, and my main priority has always been making it seamless for my mother and making sure that my enthusiasm with Linux isn't negatively impacting her. And I think I've done a fairly good job with that. You know, I've always set up all of her profiles, like for Chrome, for her email, her calendar, everything. No matter how many times I distro hop in a night, even if I know I'm going to distro hop right after that, I always get all of her set up first, just in case, because my priority is not leaving her in the dust.
So she has no problems at all running Linux?
Actually, no. I've been able to install a distro without actually like telling her anything about it. Like when we first switched to Linux, she didn't even know what was happening. And she got on it. She was like, well, this is a bit different. But then she just went about it like normal. It was not a problem at all. And I was like, whoa, this is cool.
That's awesome, dude.
Then I realized I had the power.
Well, you know, you are an extremely technical guy sometimes. You know,
it's scary.
You know a lot about the inner workings of a lot of things. Where do you find to be the best source of learning all of this stuff? Is it, you know, YouTube videos? Is it forums? Is it all of the above? Is it wikis?
I found that the best way for me to learn about different technologies, like I've read through Wikipedia pages on like the entire like XFS file system. I'm going to be honest with you, that was the most boring thing I think I've done. It was awful. I read it and I was like, I understand this, but why am I doing this?
I would ask the same question.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm sitting at the bus stop just reading through it. And honestly, the guy next to me is giving me looks because he's reading it too. And he's going, what is that? And I look at him and I say, who cares? I found that the best way for me to learn about things has always been aggregation of information. So it's different sources for different things. I realize that the struggle with this is always going to be that you have to be able to take in sources that are just going to flood in sometimes, whether it be Telegram things coming in or conversations with distro developers or conversations with software developers, and whether it's wiki pages coming in, tutorials from YouTube, all of this stuff. You're never going to be able to get all of your information from one source. So you have to be able to really get the good things from all of the sources. All right, there's going to be a lot of things to sift through. So I feel like a lot of it is more of like a brain exercise. It's more of trying to find the important pieces of information that you may need later or may never need later, more likely, and pick those out and really be able to, I guess, narrow them down and remember them for future use.
Yeah. Well, you also helps to have a good memory too, because I could read all of that and not remember anything. So,
you know what? It's going to fade over time, and I'm going to be reading through Telegram chat going, what?
Yep. So, where do you think, in the grand scheme of things, where do you think Linux is headed?
Well, I sure hope that we have a bright future. I feel like a lot of crazy, wacky technologies are coming out that are doing some cool things. Software distribution is changing with snaps, and Grub is going away, and uh, I don't know. System D is the worst, but somehow we've all caved in. But I feel like I saw recently this project where it was like a desktop environment in VR, and I saw that and I was like, okay, well this is promising, and it makes me a little worried because I've gotten comfortable with how things are, and I feel like I'm going to turn into one of those hermits that's like, don't take my stuff. I will hide in my cave and never change. And I don't want to be that guy, but I really like what I have now.
Well, I mean, you mentioned snaps and that. Okay, so there's this whole big thing, snaps versus Flatpacks. Does there need to be a war between snaps and Flatpacks? Isn't there a place where they both can be useful in the same environment?
I think so. Personally, I don't enjoy having to deal with all of them at once, but I've come to the realization that it almost never matters. It never has any significant impact in terms of breaking things or in terms of stopping me from doing what I want to do. If anything, they all just facilitate more options. And they just mean that it's easier to get things done no matter where you are. And I honestly couldn't care less at this point. Like, I've criticized snaps a lot in the past because there are some issues with them that I think are seriously important, and I think that they hurt adoption of the platform. But as a whole, I think that they're all good things, and I feel like we could use more of them, better integration of them, and better connectivity with them, and I feel like that's good for all of us.
One day, maybe there'll be a Snap or Flatpak only distribution. I know there's like similar things to that, but one day, because I made a prediction, so that has to come true.
It has to happen.
It just has to happen.
You've never been wrong before.
Ever. All right.
I think that's certainly possible.
I mean, I think it's possible, and there's people that are actually fearful that they're going to take over. I don't think that that's a thing to fear. I'm not saying they are going to take over or not going to take over. I just don't think that we need to have the war type things that we talk about all the time, where I hate this one, I like this one, I'm going to get behind this one, and that word tribalism. Yes,
There's too much of it.
Yeah. All right. So if you could change one thing about Linux, what would it be?
I'd say it's our insistence on better standards while clinging to older standards that just aren't going to be working out in the future. So I see a lot of these push for greater things, push for things to be better. And at the same time, I see us all holding back on everything. When it comes
don't take my stuff, right?
Exactly. It's like, wow, it sounds so familiar. I just feel a real connection here. Like with Grub. Like, Grub is a super useful tool. However, it's not really what we should be using when it comes to booting UEFI systems. Not only is it slower, it is an extra step on top of the already existing bootloader, essentially. And that not only means more points of breakages for no benefit, it also just means that now you've got the user managing different installs from two different entries, and one of which isn't even going to work because it's installed on another one elsewhere too. So I feel like we should have solved this problem a long time ago, but we're still very, very, very slowly getting there.
Yeah, I think that we're in a hard situation sometimes. It's just like the whole X versus Wayland.
Yeah.
Wayland's coming along, I don't believe that it's ready yet for prime time as far as to be able to do the same things that X is able to do. But at some point, we should probably move on if that's the direction that we're going to go in. But like I said, it's like we can't move on yet because obviously Wayland doesn't work with NVIDIA. We're
Right.
not well. So it's like we're in this kind of limbo state where we should move on, we could move on, but we can't move on.
Yeah.
It's terrible.
It's really difficult because everybody's pushing, and then at the same time, it's like they're pushing on a conveyor belt. So we're really, really going for it, but our legs are just kind of moving backwards behind us. So, all right.
We're going to get there.
Yeah.
We're going to get there. Just
eventually.
So thinking back on the reasons that you chose to run Linux, all of the reasons, because nobody has just one reason. Do those reasons still apply today?
I believe so. Yes. I believe they apply even more so today now that I've seen more independence between different Linux distributions. I'm really happy that certain distributions have taken it upon themselves to create their own environment with their own set of standards and not been focused on appealing to every other platform's standards. I love that we have the ability to create something truly useful and unique and really go with it rather than holding ourselves back because everyone else in the other room next door doesn't do that.
Yep.
So I'm even more excited now.
Me too. Because even though we talk about these things like X and Wayland and everything, I still am so excited for where we are compared to where we were and where we will be in the future.
Well, I mean, you saw how big macOS got based on that old BSD kernel. Just wait till all the cool hip kids with laptops are running elementary OS in the Starbucks.
And if you have anything to do with it, it'll be sooner than later.
Impulse buys.
Right? So is there anything else you'd like to share with people?
I mostly just like to say that I'm really appreciative of the community of people like you who help facilitate awesome community events and who are super active with everyone and promote Linux and help people out whenever they can. Honestly, none of this would be possible without people like you and without people, like Eric, who did this wacky thing where he created a whole forum like overnight. He was like, yeah, by the way,
I did this thing.
Yeah. So I feel like people like that are just awesome. And we need more people like that in the world. So by all means, more Linux users. Yes, please.
Yes. Yes, please. All right. So how can people get in touch with you?
I'm on Twitter at Schyken. That's Schyken. If even I can spell it correctly. I post mostly about elementary OS and me doing dumb things on the internet. So if that interests you, there I am. And youtube.com/Schyken. I finally got my URL. I was so excited about that.
Yes.
And I think I'm at Schyken at linuxrocks.online.
Yes, so, that's the Mastodon instance I'm on as well. Yep.
Sounds about right. And I think that's all I have. Oh, I guess how does Telegram work? It doesn't do that, does it? It's not like a site or like a profile.
No, yeah. I don't think so. They can find you in the Biddle Telegram group.
Yeah, you guys can stalk me on Telegram. How about that?
All right, man. That wraps up our discussion. Thank you so much, Schyken, for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me, Rocco. I really appreciate it. It's been great.
Thank you all for joining us this week as we highlight the best thing about Linux, our community. Until next time, long live Linux.
Well, I think we did discuss this a little bit on BDLL, and a lot of it comes down to this sort of echo chamber-like spreading of things that aren't necessarily information or things that aren't verified or things that are negative unnecessarily so. I feel like we have, as you said, a responsibility to actually check things first and actually, I think, let the dust settle before we jump on things and start splitting hairs. I saw, I guess just today, this report on, because I hadn't looked into it when it was a big thing.
I'm having trouble connecting to the internet. Take a look at the help section in your Alexa app.
Oh dear.
That's perfect.
I was like, who's talking? Of course.
I thought it might have been your mom, but it was a little like generic to be somebody.
Yeah. I was like, are you okay? No, it's... I love the tactic.